Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for
Sun.
waking up so early.
Yeah, it's okay. The sun was gonna wake me up anyways.
We were just joking that we talk to each other nearly every day, but this is the first time we're going to sit down in like a more formal conversation, but we want to
Yeah,
try and keep it real.
absolutely. It's gonna be great.
Absolutely.
Got lots of fun things to talk about.
I know. I don't think we're going to be able to keep it to an hour. We might just have to do an hour today and then like continue on next time.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really a big fan of part one, part two,
Me
part three.
too. It might be part 10. Kiana, thank you so much. I want to start by just like kind of, acknowledging where we both are in the world. It's quite funny because I feel like you're one of the most important people in my life right now who I've never met in person. I'm
No, you
logging
too.
I'm logging on at just after 11 a.m. in Brittany in Finistère, France. And where are you?
I'm in Paraty, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And it
Right.
is 7 o'clock in the morning. The sun's just peeking up over the mountain there. And it's going to be a hot day today. We're in peak summertime, complete opposite.
Yeah, we're just coming out of the winter here.
Yeah.
A lot of people that probably, are on the Voyage YouTube and the Now podcast, that's not supposed to be a podcast, that's probably turning into a podcast, may not know much about Paraty. Can you like tell us a little bit about what life is like there? Because you're kind of living on anchor there at the moment, right?
Yeah. It's so funny because obviously, I don't know, maybe not obvious to everyone, but very obvious to me. I've been here for 2 years, sitting basically in the same spot, you know, just to change a little scenery now and then. But this is the first time that I've been in one place and sitting in one place and able to do that. And Paraty is like this closed bay, and there's already not a lot of wind in this area, but especially not in this bay. And I've never been anywhere else where you can just like have your anchor out for months on end and like not feel stress about, oh my god, is a squall going to roll in the middle of the night, and blow 25-30 knots out of nowhere. And it just doesn't happen here. It's crazy. And now I'm very not used to wind anymore, so if it blows like 12-15, I'm already like, hey guys, there's a storm coming. Have you battened down the hatches yet? Shit. And then we rock a lot because there's a lot of tourism here, lots of boats. So the other side of not having any wind is just having lots of wakes all day.
Yeah, right. And you've
You'll
got your
see me.
dog on board with you, or maybe
Yeah,
not at the moment,
he's on the
but
beach right now. Otherwise,
okay.
he would have been crying a lot.
So to set the scene for people, you, especially those who might listen and not watch this video, you were anchored on your boat. Do you have to set up shelter because your boat has a big open deck and it being summer, you must get really hot in the cabins.
Yeah. So I've got, I don't know if it's just like
Yeah.
a little bit of a sunshade there. It's not the most optimal sunshade situation, but it works once the sun's above. So from like 7 a.m. to 9-10 a.m. it's pretty rough, and then from 4 p.m. until sunset it's pretty rough, and the water here is like a soup. And so I think that's what determines mostly the temperature inside of the boat, is how warm or cold the water is, and not necessarily the outside temperature. So in Europe you could have a really 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 hot day, but if the water is still cold, the inside of the boat's going to be pretty cool.
Right.
um Here the inside of the boat is generally hotter than the outside
Oh my
because the
God.
water is so warm, and then the hull obviously is black, um, which heats up very fast. So Yeah, it's you gotta get used to it. Really, it's not the most fun thing.
Is
Summertime.
is the water beautiful, like in terms of, clarity and cleanliness? Are you jumping off X amount of times a day to kind of like, I don't know, just feel like you might be cooling off, or is it a bit less inviting?
So, where I am anchored right now is like the pit of the bay. So if you go further out, then it's beautiful. It's really nice. But here, there's a bunch of marinas right in front of me, and then on the other side here of this, end of the bay is actual town. They don't have most of Brazil doesn't have, and a lot of the coast uh, doesn't have proper like sanitation,
Hmm.
and so as a lot of other places, unfortunately, they dump sewage into the bay here, and I mean you see a lot of just like plastic pollution, all kinds of pollution, lots of diesel spills, oil spills, because it's a huge tourism on the water spot, really, really big boats. There's probably, I don't know, 200 big boats that go out at least every day. And I don't know, in total, there's thousands of boats that work. And so when it rains, because there's never like this big storm thing that happens frequently that people are used to, it kind of catches people off guard, and it'll rain and sink boats every time it rains because people
Oh,
aren't
wow.
prepared. And then that's like sinking a boat with a full tank of diesel, and
Oh.
it's really not a nice place to swim, but also just like a very obvious place of like issues that could be easily solved with, you know, funds, government, you know, it's frustrating. I want to try to help in some way here, but it's also then very complicated because it's a militia run place. So
Okay.
then you know, the government doesn't have so much say. So who do you talk to kind of situation, and the militia runs a lot of the tourism, so you don't really want to.
And what's the tourist draw card then? Like, it sounds like it's not necessarily, pristine snorkeling and diving. Is it more on land-based tourism?
No, it's on the water, but it's further out of the bay.
Right.
So you come out, and then I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this, but you just head
Yeah,
out
yeah,
that
yeah.
way, and then there's like lots of islands and really, really nice. Then the water gets nicer. It's just inside the bay is not nice. So then the beaches, you don't come to Paraty for a beach, because to get to a beach, you have to go on a boat. You come to Paraty either for the old town, because it has this very, very nice oh no, are we frozen? Got
Okay.
it.
We dropped off. That's bound to happen, of course. It was actually me, I think. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
was
so
surprised. It's usually me.
so
But I was just saying
tourism.
that the Paraty, it's a UNESCO heritage site. It's got this old town, historic town that makes, I lived in a historic town in the United States, the oldest city in the United States, St. Augustine, Florida. Very cute Spanish colonial town. That looks like Disney World compared to this.
Wow.
This feels like you're actually, 300 years ago walking through the streets. Not much has changed. So it's like, it's really, really interesting to kind of step back into history, and then realize like what that means, especially when it comes to colonialism,
Yeah.
it's beautiful, but then you find out that every single roof tile that you're seeing um, has a different shape because it's made on the thighs of slaves. The slave women would use their thighs as the mold for these
Wow.
shingles. Yeah, it's really wild.
And
It's an interesting.
that's something like I really wanted to, I hope that we would get to talk about, is this you're experiencing, I mean, you grew up in Brazil. Like we don't need to go too deep into your past because there's a lot of podcasts and stuff where you talk about it and everything. But you grew up in Brazil. Where were you born?
I was born in Orlando.
Orlando. You grew up on a farm in Brazil, and
Yeah.
you set sail and everything, and we'll get to that part of your life. But coming back to Brazil now for the last couple of years, in a different place from where you grew up, right? And experiencing it in a way that I guess as sailors and travelers, even if you stay 3 months in a place, you're never really gonna get deep, and you're getting deep in a place. And I find that really interesting. And it's this idea of a different way of being a tourist, not a tourist, a traveler, but then embedding in the local community as an observationist. And tell me more about that experience for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, this is the first time that I'm able to stop and stay somewhere. And so many places, like, yeah, I've been able to slightly integrate the longer I stay, especially when it gets to that 3-month mark or so. Like, then you kind of become a common face in the community and all that. But here now, being 2 years, I I don't know. For me personally, like, it feels like I'm coming home, right? So it's
Yeah.
this very like nostalgic feeling, even though I had never been to Paraty before. It's just the Brazilian culture is so rich, and so it just feels so comfortable. There's man, now I'll rave about Brazil for like 10
Please,
minutes.
please do.
Because it's just, it has its issues, obviously, big issues, and a lot of them. But there's something so alive about the country as a whole, and probably especially along the coast, and especially for me personally, like being in this area of coast, which is rainforest, but a very unique rainforest. It's the only rainforest at like this latitude, with the biodiversity that it has. It's really cool. So everything just feels so alive. There's so much. I mean, we just got out of the carnival. Yesterday was the last day of carnival, and it's wild. So essentially from December until March, it's summer holidays, but for everyone. And it's just a giant party, and the food is so good, and the music is so nice, and everyone you meet is going to have time for you. And that's something I missed so much, and it's something I love about the Brazilian culture, as opposed to especially American, but maybe just most other Western culture in general, is everyone has time. Like, you don't know this person, and like 5 minutes into the conversation, you know their mother's name, you know where their grandmother grew up, like, or her health status, and it's just very intimate. So I've been able to, aside from being a very secluded person in general, like it's kind of the running joke of the Anchorage is who is the most antisocial. And right now I'm ranked number 3, which is awesome. At least I'm not number 1 most antisocial.
What other kinds of, like, are there Brazilians living on boats in the Anchorage, or is it mostly foreigners or expats or a mix?
It's all Brazilians, because Brazil has you don't run into a lot of foreigners here. Since I've been here for 2 years, I think I've seen 2 for sure foreign flagged vessels passing through. Maybe one more that I didn't really notice, but 2 for sure. And that was just recently. So Brazil is massive. The coastline is massive. There aren't so many ports. And foreign vessels, like foreign people, can only stay in the country for 3 months.
Okay.
And then you can get an extension for 6 months, and then you have to leave. And that's just not enough time to sail the coast of Brazil and enjoy it. So not a lot of foreign people come here, and it's just a hassle. And I'm sure they hear about how it's dangerous. And I think it's totally worth it definitely do it if you want that fast pace kind of get to know this beautiful country. It's for sure worth it.
And then come back, time and
Yeah,
time again to see
exactly.
more.
So yeah, it's all Brazilian, and it's really cool. I think Paraty, I definitely know for sure. I don't think Paraty is the only place that I've seen so many women on their own boats.
Really?
Yeah, so many. Like in this anchorage right now, there are two, but sometimes there'll be like, actually there's three. She's just not living aboard. Um, there'll be like 7 different boats that are all solo women sailing or just captained by women. So cool. So
So
cool. I
Brazil
never.
has quite a healthy sailing culture then, at least on the
Yeah.
coast.
Yeah. It's there's a very traditional sailing culture in Brazil, especially up north, but all along the coast, like you still see how they build these wooden boats, and that's a whole nother time.
Oh, we could go on, and that's a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah. But just beautiful, traditional construction methods, and so there's already this relationship with sail. But from what I've noticed, people haven't traditionally been sailing here for, I mean, at least since the 90s. I think they started getting outboard motors in Brazil very
Right.
early.
Which is important. Like
And
I've heard you say that before, one of the constraints for you is being on a Wharram and having an outboard motor that isn't always the most reliable and definitely not in the most accessible spot, which is why you go out to sea for so long, so you can just sail.
yeah.
But hopping around the coast is more challenging for you, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially the Brazilian coast. Like I said, there's not a lot of ports, and some of them that there are, it's very difficult to enter, either because of currents or just the size, and like there might be more wind as you go up north. And now I have a reliable engine. I bought it when I got here, so I know it works. But I've just spent so many years sailing around with engines that don't work, especially when I need them. So I just
You don't
don't
trust them anymore.
no, I don't put myself in those situations where I'm going to need an engine.
Yeah, right.
Because yeah, it's not fun when you realize it's not gonna start.
So I want to hop back in time a little bit. Well, first we're going to talk quite a lot about solo sailing. And there's this quote from a book I've been reading about sailing alone. And he says, spending weeks and months alone, slowly, quietly, and close to the ocean's surface is to create the world's largest laboratory, an endlessly changing, capricious, and startling place in which to observe oneself, the weather, the stars, and a myriad of sea creatures. And in this book by Richard J. King, he explores questions: why go and what they saw. So I want to hop back in time a little bit and weave through a little bit of the backstory of how you came to find Maranoka, your boat, your Wharram Narai Mark I, which is a Polynesian-inspired double canoe, aka catamaran, that has inspired us to build the descendant of yours, a Narai Mark IV, and you can see our model of one hull in the background. But talking about, sitting on hot water, that's where Maranoka was when you found her, right? Him.
Yeah.
He's an older man,
Yeah.
an older gay man.
Yes. Yeah, in Panama. So it's basically the same kind of climate as here, but it rains more. And it was sitting there, had 2 custom-made tarps, which I really wish I still had, that would cover each hull. And so it was covered in tarps, and it had a for sale sign on it. And I had been living on Ontong Java for nearly 2 years, which is essentially a replica of a Polynesian voyaging canoe from plans found in a museum that were, introduced by Captain Cook. And so just like this magnificent vessel. And
And you
I've
had
always,
wanted your own, right, by that time?
yeah, and I've always been into like a more simplistic lifestyle. I've been attracted to that. I remember when I was a child, like there was this it wasn't a silo, but it was like this little hut made out of wood where we would store corn. And I would look at that hut and say, that is going to be my house one day. That is what I want to live in. And it had like these big slats in between. Like it's basically just exposed with a little bit of wood. And now I sleep in this.
Now you have the boat version.
Yeah, so I'd always been attracted to that. Being on board on Tong Java, I was like, wow, this is what's possible, you know, and so my desire was a catamaran. It was a black catamaran, just to make it more specific. It was a totally modifiable boat, so I could do whatever I wanted aboard, and low draft, so that I don't have to be afraid of getting into things so often.
Yeah.
And yeah, I focused on that image, I think, for a few months, maybe, 4 or 5 months. And we sail in, and there's the boat under the tarps with a for sale sign on it. I'm like, shit. I imagined it so specifically, so it would be more difficult. But here it is.
Yeah, it had that opposite effect. And you had the money saved for the time, like at the time, you did you have the money, or did you have to get that, negotiate?
Yeah, so the boat ended up getting sold first to a friend of ours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was pretty upset, but I didn't have the money, and I had emailed anybody I could think of at the time. I'm like, this is what's happening. This is my plan. This is like, can you lend me some money? And everyone would reply and be like, oh, haha, that's cute. Like, are you sure? I don't know. I had just gotten done doing real estate in Miami, and yeah, I'm living aboard this pirate ship essentially, but nobody could imagine me doing that by myself, or like me even wanting to, or where that's coming from. And I don't know where it came from, aside from this like pure attraction to simplicity and living exposed. And I don't know, it's so addicting. I think it's just like this return to natural states and more animalistic states, and our bodies and our brains, but especially our bodies, I think, know how to deal with that so well. You don't have to like teach yourself how to be hot or be cold and like deal with that. Your body knows how to do it, and the more you're exposed to it, I think the more kind of addicting it gets, being that it's so natural.
But you did have to teach yourself how to sail and learn the boat. And let's talk about the draw of being alone to do that. That want to be solo so that you can, I mean, you and I have a similar thing that we've talked about before, in that I guess we like to make mistakes by ourselves and learn ourselves, but without being judged by others. And we won't dig into the psychology of that, but just tell me about, you end up getting the boat then, right? So
Yeah.
people won't loan you money. They kind of laugh in your face, which is funny now. And we can talk about that later. Because, the similar experience with the film and stuff, but we'll talk about that later. But it gets sold to a friend then.
Yes, the friend lasted about 6 months. I got a message from another friend while I was in California on this story about the day that I found out the boat was for sale is it's such a pure testament to myself personally, of like how well I can feel my path and how much I should trust like my instincts. So I woke up that morning, 2018, like late March or mid-March or something. And I did not feel good. Something's wrong. I don't need to be in California anymore. I'm living in this van. I have a lover. Everything's great. But I feel like this depression coming on. I feel like something's not right. And so that morning I'm like, okay, I need to clear my head. I'm going to get in the van and I'm going to drive 2 hours north to this marina in Oregon. And I'm just going to go walk the docks and look for boats and see what's there. On my way there, I get a phone call or a text message from a friend. They're like, hey, your boat's for sale. Because I had already told a bunch of people, like, this is my boat. I don't care that it's actually not my boat. It's my boat. There's no
I'm
way.
going to get it.
Yeah. And so I called the guy, that had bought it. And I was like, listen, you can't. Like, it's my boat. You can't post this on Facebook. And he was in a rush to leave because his girlfriend went, back to Europe, and he wanted to follow her. And I said, listen, I don't have the money right now, but if you let me pay you over time, I'll be there as soon as you want. He said, can you be here next week? I'm like, hell yeah.
No way.
So I ended up continuing on to Oregon, and I'm walking around this marina. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I already have a boat. I need to get back home and start packing. And so I drive back, tell my lover, I'm like, listen, I gotta go.
There's
sorry.
another love waiting for me in Panama, and it's black and has 2 hulls.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
and then you just
then I wound up there.
got on a plane and went back to Panama, and then
Maranoka
was yours.
And that day also, like, traveling between California and Panama, I went to Miami. I had to stay there at night, and my flight was the next day to Costa Rica, where I would catch a bus for like 8 hours to get to the border, where I catch a boat to then get to,
Oh, wow.
And when I'm in Miami, I like start feeling sick, like sick to my stomach, and then I just couldn't stop throwing up, and I had to cancel my flight the next day and push it for the day after. And I didn't realize it at the time, but now I realize, like, I was having like an anxiety panic attack for 2 days.
Wow.
Because I didn't feel scared to go on the boat. I felt excited, but it was just like this, your body knowing that your reality is about to change. Like, everything is about to change. And yeah, it was rough. And then I got to Costa Rica. I was still really sick. They were taking care of me in the hostel, feeding me baking soda and water.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was probably really sick for like almost 4 days.
But you made it.
I need to grab my dinghy real quick.
Yeah,
it's getting delivered.
Sorry. Was it floating away? I'm like, is your dinghy floating away?
No, it was on the beach.
Oh.
It was on the beach. So I got a dog delivery and a dinghy delivery.
Perfect. You can get anything.
Yeah.
So you're really sick. You're having this anxiety attack over your the thing that you've wanted for 6 months or more, and then you get it quite remarkably easily in the end. Like, you don't have to go and email 20 people and borrow money. Like, you've got this deal to pay the seller back over time, and then the boat's yours, and you make it, crawling, almost on hands and knees, sick.
Yeah, so sick.
Panama, and he's there. Maranoka's there with the tarps.
It's amazing. So yeah, as soon as I was on board, that kind of sickness disappeared. Like,
wow.
All right, this is it. This is new life. I did call a friend to come help me sail, because I figured I don't know how to sail. I need somebody to help me. And the only people I knew at the time to help me were men. I only knew men that sailed. Any women that I knew that were living on boats were, girlfriends, wives of the men that sailed.
Right. It's funny how, like, if that was now, I'm sure so many capable, like, sailing women, it would be a completely different story. But yeah, that's super interesting. And that's that's not necessarily a bad thing, because those guys were there, I'm sure, just, you know, like keen to help you and help empower you and give you the confidence to then learn this boat and learn how to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Or not. Or want to kick them off and just learn how to do it all yourself then.
Yeah,
what happened?
We spent 2 weeks together. And it was, it was you're a woman,
Right.
aboard your boat, but you don't know what to do. Now you have a man who knows more, so he's assuming this captain role, and automatically these things come up. And then obviously then there's this sexual aspect that you have to deal with as a woman, and like be either very clear about that, but then you're alone with a man at sea, so like how do you like not, you know, make this neutral enough to where like they don't freak out, you're not in danger, even though you know this person. I don't know, it's just a very like, it's an intense thing that women have to deal with that men would never understand. And they think it's like to our advantage, at least in my experience having conversations about sexual advances and stuff like this with men. They're like, oh, but you're so lucky, you know, first you can use it to your advantage, and second you can get laid whenever you want. I'm like, yeah, but no, it sucks. You don't understand. Like, how am I gonna explain this?
Wow. I feel like what you said right there is like what's wrong with half the politics in the world right now.
Yeah,
That's an entire discussion on its own that we actually should have down the track, because it would make for a very interesting conversation. So did that lead to you just going like, nah, I want to be alone?
Yeah, I need you off the boat, and okay, now I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do. I spoke with Hans, who was getting ready to cross the Atlantic, and he had told me, okay, you can follow me, like, or you stay or you come, whatever. And I'm like, shit, all right, I just kicked this guy off. What am I going to do? Either I'm going to take somebody who knows less than me, which is like super scary because I don't know even how to pull up this mainsail right now, or I'm going to take somebody who knows more than me, and I'm going to be in the same situation again. What's my third option? Sail alone. Let's fucking do it. You know, Hans did not discourage me from sailing alone, and I trusted him and trust him with my life. And like, I know that he wouldn't put me in a situation where I would, you know, potentially die. So, and I kind of trusted that. Obviously, we could be in those situations anytime, anywhere. But yeah. So that's like, okay, I'm doing this alone. Let's do it. And I don't think I really explained that to my parents. Hold on, a helicopter.
Oh, I can't hear it, actually. Your mic is good.
Can you hear it?
Not at all. Not at all.
Really?
Yeah, I can see it, but I can't hear it. That mic is great.
That's awesome. It's like circling
How long
around.
were you living? How long were you on the boat then before you did this? You like figured out how to get that anchor up and set that mainsail. And I mean, like, knowing Hans was in a perimeter, and you obviously had some kind of radio contact, but from the time you got the boat and you were on it to going off on that first Atlantic crossing, how, like, are we talking weeks, months?
Yeah, weeks. So from the time I got onto the boat to the time we left Panama, you know, to start the trip, it was maybe 4 weeks. Yeah, maybe 3 or 4.
Amazing. Like, amazing. And the funny thing is, you know, when you're doing Women in the Wind, and we'll get there, you know, people, there are always the armchair admirals who are like, this is so irresponsible and blah blah blah, but you know, I'm told you I'm reading this book by Richard J. King, and he's going through this history, at least recorded history, you know, like written history, so a lot of it is a white, you know, westernized version, but of, you know, men going out to do these trips, and not all of them had great sailing experience either, let alone like good boats. And I don't know, I don't think they would have got the same kind of rap as women like you 4 weeks into having this boat is like, yeah, I can do it and go across. And so you set out on the Atlantic crossing. Is that the crossing that is your YouTube video that went viral, or is that a different, that's your second crossing?
That's my second crossing, yeah. Just about the armchair admirals and the people that and also yeah, just the essence of sailing alone, but sailing in general. There's a quote by Joshua Slocum and his Sailing Alone Around the World, where he says, "To young men contemplating a voyage, I would say go. The tales of rough usage are for the most part exaggerations, as also are the tales of sea danger. To face the elements is, to be sure, no light matter when the sea is in its grander mood. You must then know the sea and know that you know it and not forget that it was made to be sailed over." And I think that's a big thing, is anytime you're hearing somebody tell you about their storm stories and how, wild and crazy it is, probably an exaggeration. And yeah, I don't know, especially when it's supposed to deter you or scare you. Like, yeah, it's rough. It's rough. Sitting in traffic is also rough. Climbing up 20 flights of stairs is also rough with all your groceries. Like, there's a lot of things that are difficult in life and like not fun. But fuck, being out at sea is a lot more beautiful than most of them.
and on a Polynesian inspired double canoe that so many people don't know the history of, the Polynesian navigation, and Polynesians were written off. They wouldn't have been able to colonize this region. They must have drifted from South America, which has been proven false.
Yeah.
And I think, James Wharram experienced this blowback from armchair admirals, even as a man, when he first was attempting his crossings. And, on Rongo as well, and your boat's a descendant of Rongo, the first catamaran to cross the Atlantic successfully. There were other boats that were not making it across at that time. And so there has to be this element. You've been on Ontong Java for a couple of years, which is a Polynesian voyaging canoe replica. You had confidence in these boats, right? I mean, the first time we spoke and I was telling you that, oh, we've got to get a monohull, it's going to be safe. And you're like, actually, you might want to consider these boats and look into them a little more because they're pretty safe. So do you want to talk about that aspect of, trusting in the boat? Because I feel like in all the crossings, like the one that you've recorded on YouTube and Women in the Wind, like that your trust for your boat plays a massive role.
Yeah. Man, I think it's, first of all, essential, no matter what boat you're on. Like, you got to know that you can trust it. And that's not blindly trusting it. It's test trusting it, And so for the Atlantic crossing, that's the thing, is like, crossing the Atlantic is like this grand thing. It's this difficult thing. But for me, my most impactful sailing and the most difficult sailing and the grandest sailing was right when I left Panama on the way to to Colombia, Haiti, across. I'm beating against the wind every single day for months on end, and I am just destroying this boat. It's already destroyed, but now I see how it works in the worst conditions.
And let's not forget that your boat is like already 50 years old and has been sitting on anchor in Panama for what, like maybe a decade? We don't know, like a long time. Yeah. And yet,
I think, the key element to that is naivete.
Mm-hmm.
So the less you know, the easier it is. I mean, I seriously, like, truly thought that it's normal that I'm having to empty out my boat every 3 hours with buckets. Like, I thought that was like this is just how it is.
Yeah,
So
note
it
to
doesn't
people watching
scare
and
me.
listening, that is not normal. Like, definitely get that part sorted out before you go and cross an ocean.
Or be prepared to
Yeah,
bail. And that's what
have a
I
lot of
did.
buckets.
I just bailed every day, like every 3 hours as we're sailing, especially into the wind. It would be every 1 hour or so.
So this is
Um,
just filling up inside the hulls?
yeah, I had some cracks in the deck joints.
Right.
Um, because the original classic system of the classic designs, they're
Yeah.
joined, the beams and the decks are joined with these brackets that have bolts through the decks, which, I understand the concept, but it doesn't last 50 years because you're going to have decks rotting around those boats.
That's it, as
Bolt-
opposed to lashings, which is what we're
right.
going to do on our boat.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So it's basically coming in through those intrusions, just the deck being separated from the hull, really. And yeah, but I had Hans, who had obviously he's lived on catamarans since he was in his 20s, lived on boats since he was a child, but only catamaran since his 20s, and lived on a Wharram, a tahini, for 16 years.
Oh, wow.
Raised his family there.
16 years. Wow. Right.
Yeah. And so, I had heard stories about how safe they were. And then an
Yeah.
amazing document, PDF that I read prior to the cross. I think I read it while I was in Panama, is called Storm Tactics for Wharrams.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. You read those stories, you're like, I'm fine. I'll be fine. But just this concept, and also hearing Wharrams don't flip over. Like,
Yeah.
that's your fear in a multi-hull as opposed to a monohull, is that they're going to capsize.
And
But
can you
yeah, sure.
explain for people who don't understand, like, why Wharrams and Polynesian vessels are unique in that they don't capsize?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know as specifically as Hanukkah would,
Yeah.
but it's this V shape of the hull, and also not a
Mm-hmm.
lot of windage at the top. So I don't
Yeah.
have a big doghouse, a big cabin top where there's a kitchen and stuff, as most catamarans do. That's like, because catamarans aren't so deep in the water, the more you have above, the more dangerous it is. My boat it's quite deep in the water. I mean, it's less than a meter, which is nothing for monohulls, but compared to what's out of the water and what's in the water, it's about equal.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference. And one of the storm tactics you have for these boats, because also it's made out of wood. Once you
Mm-hmm.
go full fiberglass, this might be a little bit different. Like, if you were to sink, what happens,
Yeah.
and the boat will then, like, if you have one hull filling up with water, it'll likely flip over. Being that it's wood, it has more buoyancy. It's supposed to only sink to the water line. So in a storm, you can sink the boat yourself up to the water line so that it gets really, really heavy and is not going to fly away. Now, this is like
Wow.
hurricane situation. This is
Yeah.
not like,
That's like your worst case scenario, which thankfully
yes.
you haven't had to experience. And then on that first crossing, did you experience any real weather, or were you playing or like being very cautious? Because I think I remember in your video of your second crossing, the video on YouTube, which went viral from just the beauty of the immersive experience that you share with people. Like, you shot that on a broken iPhone, which I love.
Yeah.
You get towards the end of the video and you're like, yeah, like, I can't wait to do this again, but with wind. You took it so cautiously, and that you're ready for the holiday to be over and to do some actual sailing, which is so cool because we get to see that more in Women in the Wind.
Yeah. The first crossing, yeah, I had, because the North Atlantic, that's where, knowing that Women in the Wind, the film, had to be shot in the North Atlantic came from. Because it's rough. It's rough, and it's constantly changing. It's not the trade winds coming back
Yeah.
from Africa to the Caribbean. That's the coolest, lightest, best, easiest sailing that exists.
That's Champagne crossing.
Yeah. But sailing across the North Atlantic, yeah, it's variable, because you're working with pressure systems that are either going to come up high enough to affect you, or they're not. They might suck away your wind. You're stuck without wind, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, the first crossing, there was, well, as many might know by now, because I've said it a few times, but it's always an interesting fact. Day 7 of 30 days of my first Atlantic crossing, I lost my mast, which at the time,
wow.
it was a galvanized steel, like crisscross radio tower looking thing. I loved it because you could just climb up like a ladder all the way to the top. Really easy. Very nice. But I had a bit of an accident. And through this accident, I learned that I'll never sail in tandem again.
Right.
And lost the mast. And
So
with
did
Hans's
you
help,
come too close to Hans? Is that what happened?
Yeah. So this will be the first or second time that I'm telling this story in full.
Oh, I feel so privileged to get the story then.
So Hans and I had been sailing in tandem through the Caribbean for, a year, and we were very used to getting close by each other, and he would throw me food or books, or I would throw him something, and we got really good at that. We'd done it dozens of times. Crossing the Atlantic, the first few days we didn't have any wind, and then when the wind started, it was very apparent that Antong Java was going to be twice as fast as I was, because I had a very small sail. He had 90 square meters of sail to go downwind. So he was a little frustrated and wanted to throw me a bigger sail to just put up more cloth. And came on the wrong side of me. And his boom is like, I for context, the boom that's in the Women in the Wind film, which is this tree bark branch that's massive and actually extends longer than the end of my boat. When I got to the Azores after Women in the Wind, I gave Hans this boom, and that became about 1/3 of the size of his full boom.
Right.
So, and it's also made out of tree branches, and just a little twig that was sticking off of the fucking tree branch. Just like a little twig like that, just hooked right into one of my shrouds and just pulled the mast down.
Holy moly.
Yeah. I never knew the feeling of screaming in desperation, without meaning to. You just let out this and that's what happened. I'm like, fuck, I'm just trying to cross the Atlantic for the first time,
and you get demastered by your mentor.
Yeah.
So I can see why you only ever sail alone now. Completely.
Exactly. I'm
like no tandem.
no people on board, no people around.
Don't come near me. How do you cope in that? I mean, I can only imagine this is just like a massive crash kind of noise and chaos in the moment. And then were you able to save it, or did it just fall in the water?
It broke in half as it came down because it fell on top of the doghouse and then just bent and broke. I was right next to it. I was maybe half a meter from where it fell.
Wow.
Right next to it. I actually, now that you say the noise, I don't remember what it sounded like at all.
Oh, that's interesting.
I just remember my scream. Yeah.
Wow.
And so we threw the mast in the water. It had to go. It was broken, but I was able to save all of my stays, shrouds, all the sails. Nothing ripped. It was amazing, and I had all my sails
incredible.
happened, and nothing tore. Hans, being that his boat is this, wooden ship, he's already, and with many years of experience and knowledge, he was prepared for things like this and had spare posts and stuff. So we were able to set up a jury rig with a 6-meter pole that he had on his boat. And from that experience, I learned that I always need to have extra sticks. And I always sail with an extra boom, essentially. And that extra boom can become an extra mast or anything else I need. But something that is as long as a boom should be at least. And I tie this under the boat in between the two hulls. And yeah,
which you've had to actually use, right? You lost a boom on your crossing back to Brazil after the Women in the Wind crossing.
Yeah, it just split in half, and yeah, so lucky. I'm so all of these, I've had like these, intense experiences, like losing your mast or whatever, but I've always been very lucky in them, like when they happen and how they happen, and what I learned from them that I was able to then apply to situations that came further down the line. Like, sure, maybe if you get like a Beneteau 50, things are gonna break less, but when they break, they're gonna cost you a lot of fucking money to order it from Italy or wherever the fuck. Things on Noka might break more often. But they're so easy to fix. They're free to fix.
Yeah.
Shit, when you're crossing the Atlantic for 30 days, you kind of want something to happen. Otherwise, it can be pretty boring.
Which is probably not what you told Alize and Laerke before you went on the Women in the Wind crossing. But
this is great.
let's kind of skip ahead to, okay, you've had this intense experience on your first crossing, but you were in tandem, so you were never completely alone, and you had Hans's help. And then you how long before you go out again and do your second crossing, the one that's on YouTube?
So we arrive in the Azores around beginning of August 2019, go on to Europe, Portugal, spend a few months there. Then it got too cold, so December we sailed to Morocco. In Morocco is when we split up and never again sailed in tandem, which is interesting. Actually, we sailed in tandem quickly when we were in Azores again for Women in the Wind, but not really. So then I stayed in Morocco for a bit longer. I snuck out on Christmas night, went to the Canaries. So by New Year's, I'm in the Canary Islands. February, the world shuts down.
Oh, yes, right. So we're in COVID time now.
Now it's COVID. My plan before COVID was I'm going to sail back to Portugal once it starts warming up. I'm going to go to Berlin, live there for 6 months, learn how to speak German because my family all speaks German and I don't. And like I had all these plans, and then the world shuts down. Hans had already left to cross the Atlantic again. I think he was actually at sea when COVID shut down happened. And yeah, I stayed until the end of April in the Canaries, total lockdown. I hate to say it, but I really enjoyed that because it gave me a lot of space. And I'm already this antisocial person. And so to not have to make any excuses for why I can't hang out today was like a relief for a couple months, but then it got scary. Then I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? It's April, nothing's changed. It's only getting worse. So I decided to then cross the Atlantic again because my family's all on the other side, in the Caribbean, United States, Brazil. And it's like, okay, might as well get closer to them in case all this gets way worse. And if I'm already stuck quarantining, I might as well extra quarantine in the middle of the ocean.
Just go and be at the mercy of the ocean. And let's talk about that trip, because this is your first time then to be completely alone at sea. And I feel like you captured it really beautifully and so simply in that video, which is why it's, gone viral with like 1 million views. And, your intention was never to be a YouTuber, and you've basically not posted anything since, which I think a lot of people would love that you do. And I love that you don't. You're really dissenting about that. But let's talk about that trip, because, these are where I think when you were talking about your body, just knowing its natural rhythms, and I feel like this is the trip where you really got to experience that alone for the first time.
Yeah, and it's wild. I mean, especially that trip being so easy. Like I had 12, 13 knots of wind from the same direction every single day. Nothing changed.
Wow.
And so you have to find other ways to like, because otherwise you're in isolation. You're on this like tiny little area.
And let's just like set the scene for people who don't understand your boat completely either. And I learned this in, watching the video and talking more to you over the past year, but you don't have a automatic helm. Like you have done, which I first learned reading Joshua Slocum, this amazing, really simple way of setting your sheets to the tiller so that so long as the wind is basically coming in the right direction, your boat is sailing itself and you don't have to touch the tiller at all. So you're like literally able to just kind of be on vacation for weeks and not change a thing, not touch a thing, maybe a few tweaks here and there. Can you explain a little bit about that and how you learned how to do it?
Yeah. So I had sailed through the Caribbean against the wind for, a year and a half. And I never learned how to sail downwind during that entire time. So crossing the Atlantic for the first time over to Europe was the first time that I'm sailing downwind and had to learn the sheet to tiller system. It took me a couple days to understand what was happening.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand it, But essentially, because I have monohulls, Joshua Slocum, he would do it on his actual jib or Genoa. I have 2 forestays. So my inner jib, I use that as my steering sail. It's a tiny little sail. It doesn't do anything else except steer. And essentially you have your sheet running all the way back through pulleys to the tiller bars. And as you're going downwind, a boat is always going to want to turn into the wind by itself. So the boat starts turning into the wind catches that sail and pulls it, that pulls the line and pulls the tiller back downwind until that sail loses pressure and it goes limp. And so the boat then wants to turn into the wind again. But this movement is, you don't notice it. I look on my
it's really subtle, right?
Yeah, and the tracker doesn't even pick it up. It's amazing. And it's funny because it, like, you set it up and you watch the boat finding the way. So it takes like 5 minutes and the boat will kind of like start moving into exactly the right position for it and the way that it wants to move. I don't know how to steer. Like, I am terrible at steering. The boat hates it when I put my hand on the helm. Hates it.
It must just be like this
amazing.
magic power, you're just were you just sitting there once the boat like got it, and after a couple of days and you got it, were you just sitting there in awe? Like, how is this possible?
Totally. And like, while I was first figuring it out, like, instead of going back and adjusting there as now I know to do, I would just kind of reach up. I'm laying down watching the boat, and I would reach up and grab the steering line to be able to like adjust the boat when it needed to go more downwind and stuff. You still have to do that every once in a while, like if you get a strong gust of wind and stuff. But yeah, just kind of like playing with the different elements, the sail, the sheet, the tillers, you use rubber. So the tension, how much tension is on that. And when it all comes together, you're like, fuck, this is so simple and amazing. And like, nothing's going to break. What's going to break? Your line is going to chafe through, which it never popped for me, but I've been using the same line since 2019. And on my trip to Brazil, I I had to cut it because it was getting thin. And so I cut it and tied a little knot, and there we go. I fixed my autopilot for the next 4 years.
This is, I feel like, that I am researching creative practice. That's what I do, my academic work. And I wanted to bring up the idea of sailing as a creative practice. And like, you're just detailing that. And people don't necessarily associate that because we're so used to seeing creativity as a product, like as something. The arts is, an industry, and it is, but essentially creativity is our inherent, way of being, and humans are really good at being creative. It's how we make meaning in the world. And you're now out at sea alone, like having to survive on this boat and tinkering with, I mean, pretty much ancestral knowledge, because our ancestors have been doing that, particularly on these boats, for a long time. And that must just be incredibly empowering to be in your like pure creative essence without, wondering how you're going to monetize this. Like, you're just literally using your creative senses and self. And talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the creative thing in sailing is so cool because, I mean, sailing can be a pretty rigid world, sometimes, in that things are supposed to be a certain way. Your boat has to be a certain shape, a certain weight to do a certain thing, and like your bulkheads have to be placed in certain, and like all of that, yes, for sure. To move through the water safely and efficiently, there are ways to do it. But something I love, the one thing I love the most about Wharrams, and that I think is so special, is that everything above the hull, you can do whatever the fuck you want to it, and it's up to you. So, like, the boat Maranoka used to have 2 masts. Ever since I've been sailing it, it's only had 1. Like, how much of a difference does that make? I don't know. It's 2 different ways of sailing. It's 2 different rig setups and different types of sails, and they do different things, but you still get the same outcome, which is sailing across an ocean or whatever it may be. And so Wharram designs allowing for this play and creativity with the design itself, with what your environment that you want to live and sail on is like so cool, because you don't see that in any other boats, at least that I know.
And
that
it's so accessible, because you like the way that the designs are made, like that's the technical side of things that, like, I'm so grateful that these professional designers over decades, Hanneke and James and their team, have been able to, do that heavy lifting. I don't have to worry about that part. I stick to the plans for that. But like you said, once you're out there and above, you can customize, and that's when I think the fun is going to start. Like, of course, the building process as well, but you're not necessarily like, you're following plans, essentially. Like, that's what we're doing. Even with building this hull, you're still solving problems. You have to interpret the plans. It's still using your creative brain, obviously. But what you're explaining, how often are we seeing that on other boats? Like, we're not, maybe people who are building their own wooden boats, for sure. But yeah, Wharrams are pretty special for that. And I mean, Hans is a great example of that with Ontong Java, which is like a museum on the water. But I mean, Maranoka is almost becoming a bit of a museum on the water too.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, in the living space and the sailing itself, like, there's something I love when I'm bored sailing middle of the ocean. You got some nice but weak downwind, especially the weak downwind, because like, you can go really slow sometimes, is just playing with all the sails I have. I'll bring them all on deck and I'll be like, all right, let's throw up 3 sails at the front and see what that does. And I'm like, okay, no, that one sail's taking the wind away from the other one. Let's just take that one down. Let's try 2 sails. Oh no, let's try another sail hanging off of the boom into the water to like catch the air that's passing underneath the boom and beside the boat, and see how that does. And it's just so much fun.
Now
I don't
let's talk about the whole concept of sailing alone being actually like this realization that you're not alone at all. Of
Oh
course,
yeah.
the ocean and all the beings in the ocean and everything and all the entities from the wind, the sun, everything. But like what you're telling me is like you're playing with your best friend, the boat and the
Oh,
sails, and this
oh
is just a living being. Like, let's talk
yeah.
about that.
It's really cool because I'm just gonna move this here out of the sun. On my way to Brazil, when my boom snapped, it shredded the sail that was up, my mainsail then. Shredded it because I had the end tip of like half of the boom just flogging in the air off the end of the sail. And so I had to take that sail down. And once I was able to change the boom, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to put up my other very rotten sail, which is the sail in the Women in the Wind film, which has been my sail since I arrived in the Azores in 2019, and was a sail of Hans that he had aboard for 10 years before that. And who knows where that came from, because he didn't buy it new, So like, let's say the sail is like 20 years old.
Wow.
Um, and I brought it out to stitch it on, and it felt like I was hanging out with like one of my best friends that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was such a strange feeling, and I wrote about this in my crossing journal because I just have like so much gratitude for that sail. It
Mm-hmm.
took me across I did not take myself across the ocean. And like, that's something I refuse to like believe, is that I did this. No, I didn't do this. The boat did this. The sails did this. Like, it's something super magical. So yeah, I definitely feel in companion with the boat. With Ontong Java was when I learned how to communicate with boats, I think, because I talked to that boat a lot. And that's a big mama boat. That's she's powerful. And so yeah, I don't know, like my first Atlantic crossing and the second one, also all of them, but the first two, spending so many days aboard and like laying down there and sometimes feeling frustrated or hearing that the boat's frustrated. The first Atlantic crossing, it was actually both of them. Yeah, they, before the refit, they were the beams were like sliding across the deck and just making these awful, awful noises. And I would just pet the boat and say, listen, I swear, if you get me there, I will take care of you. I promise you. And I would just like talk to it and tell it these things. And then I eventually was able to, which is really nice. But another company that I have out there, like, it's interesting, we always have these conversations where it's more common that you have this narrative of your greatest teachers are other people, and other people will serve as a mirror onto yourself so you can learn all these things. But what about us and being absolutely alone? Like, not everyone has that opportunity, and not everybody wants to have that opportunity or chooses to, because it's like, fuck, I mean, spending 4-6 weeks alone is it's a really eye-opening experience, especially if you're faced with like harsher conditions, you're in an inhospitable environment, like you can't survive at sea without, external food, water, things that you bring along the boat, And so I think that's like a really interesting experience, to see what kind of outlook you begin to have on life,
Mm.
and on yourself and other people and your relationships by being alone for such a long time. And then especially in like storm settings, rough weather, where you can get like, I there's something, I think in the movie I also say I never felt afraid.
Yeah.
Fear is not an emotion that you have a lot of time for when there's adrenaline going
Yeah.
on. But annoyance is. I was annoyed as fuck a lot. I'm like, why the fuck? I do not want to be wet right now. Like, the boat's slamming back and forth, and you're just like this for days. And like, this sucks. But then you look over the side, and there are dolphins having the time of their life in these big waves. And it seems like they really I think dolphins love storms, and that's always like something that brings so much joy in a situation like that. And then you see the birds either just like gliding in this 30 knots of wind, or they land and they're just floating on the water, and it looks like they're all the time floating in the troughs of the waves and like hiding from the wind inside the waves.
That's
It's
so
just like,
fascinating.
it's so fascinating. It's incredible. So then you look at that and you're like, I'm fine.
I gotta get my shit together. Like, these guys are totally playing, and here I am annoyed.
Yeah.
Time to reset the mind. Susan Smiley, in her book that I could not put down recently, called The Half Bird, she talks about her solo sailing for 3 years from the UK around to Greece. And at one point towards the end, she says, you can't live forever alone at sea. And she sort of explains how she loves the idea of community in theory and on paper, but in practice, it's kind of a lot harder. So let's talk about this. You've crossed the Atlantic now, like what, 2 times, and then I guess you're completely alive and being creative when you're at sea. But then you got to go to land, and like, what next? So then you start to feel a little bit lost, because I think that humans, because we're out of these intact communities of relatedness and just doing the things to survive and being creative in our being as humans. Like, all of the nuclear family is set up, and we're so disconnected from each other and non-human beings as well, that I think that it creates this void where Westerners try and fill it with purpose. You got to find your purpose, but you're in this, shit, I'm feeling a bit lost with, like, not really a lot of responsibility, and the idea to do the next crossing with crew, Women in the Wind, like, this is a big change for you, like, I love that you want to take women. Alize is like, never really sailed before, and Laerke has a little bit. But Marinoka also needs a massive refit before this is possible. And suddenly you've got to think about, like, other people. You've got to get a life raft, like, the boat needs work now. You can't just bail out every 3 hours. You're going to have people, you're going to be responsible. Let's talk about that shift and that kind of search for community, and how this is just gone from. It's interesting too, because when you were doing that, it spins into this project which is not necessarily what you had in mind. Laerke wants to do a book, and she wants to take the photos, and then it just skyrockets, and it's this whole other thing. But going back to when you first got the boat, and everyone's like laughing at you, like, yeah, nice, cute idea. Okay, so we're going to make this movie going across the Atlantic, 3 women on this 50-year-old boat. We need a little bit of support to make a movie, because movies are really expensive to make, even the simple ones, and no one will help you guys. Like, no one. Again. So let's go back there. Let's go to the beginning of the Women in the Wind journey.
Yeah, it was funny. It's still pandemic, now it's July 2020 something. I'm in the Caribbean again, and it's really hit me, like, I have so much freedom, especially the pandemic, and watching that, and watching people having to be stuck in their homes, and like, like, you can't escape. Like, if you're living in France and your family's on Australia, like, it's too fucking bad. But I had this way of taking my entire home and sailing away. Sure, maybe some places wouldn't let you come in, but you're free. You're fucking free. It's different. And I've just been living this life then since 2016. This point's 2020 of just presence every day. I'm here. I don't have any responsibilities, you know. Yeah, now I have a boat, but like, I don't know what it needs. Like, I was.
It's still
It's
going, so
fine.
she'll be right
Yeah.
for a while longer.
And then I had Laerke that I had met earlier that year. You know, I want to go sailing. Like, we're gonna do this, and I'll take photos of you while you write your book, and blah blah blah. And typically, when people say I want to go sailing with you, I'm like, yeah, sure. It's because they don't really mean it, and I don't really mean it. But she really meant it. And then as time progressed, I'm like, oh shit, like, okay, she's serious, and like, I'm not gonna break her heart now and tell her no, so we're just gonna keep going. And what are we gonna do? I don't want to make a movie about me. Just don't. Like, it's just, what am I teaching people? To be selfish and fuck off? Like, I don't know. Just live your life. Like, yeah, that's great, but it's not fitting for everyone and their situation. And
Yeah.
you know, so it feels a little too.
And I love that you didn't want to preach that. You were very aware of that.
It's a difficult thing it's obviously something I would want everyone to be able to experience.
Yeah.
But it does come to this point where then you kind of feel empty, and you're like, oh shit, like, I want to give something back. You know, my dream when I was a little and even young teenager, and I wanted to become a millionaire. I didn't want to become a millionaire because I wanted $1 million. I want to become a millionaire so I don't have to work anymore, and I don't have to do anything else ever except lay in bed and do nothing. And like, I did 4 years of that, and I'm like, okay, like, awesome. I know how to do that. I'm bored.
No, I think it's inherent in our DNA to be interconnected in the world that we're interconnected with. Like, you can try and escape it all you want, but it'll come and creep under your skin. Like, this desire to be in community and to be in this reciprocal relationship, adding value to people's lives and the planet. Like, that is just, you know, the blueprint of humans. We may have forgotten it, and capitalism and politics may be like shitting all over it, but at the end of the day, you hear this over and over again from people, like, you know, retirees who reach retirement and they don't have this work purpose anymore, and they're like, shit, I'm bored. And then, you know, they start to volunteer and work more in community. And I have read it in books about adventurers and sailors who are doing these very individual projects. But, you know, I think the reason that so many adventurers create impact projects around their adventuring is because of this deep desire to be in some kind of reciprocity and just being human. So that definitely is what happened to you.
Yeah, and I just, so then the idea comes is like, okay, I have to take Laerke sailing. Obviously, like, there's no way I can back out of this. So how are we going to make this the most like impactful thing that we can, and actually help people if we can? And so if I'm going to take one girl, I might as well take some more. So eventually, at the beginning, it was like, it was going to be 4 of us.
But your boat can accommodate this. Like, people don't realize how actually like spacious
I've got
Wharram,
2
like,
meters of headroom.
yeah, and there's 2 halls. It's like 2 houses, you know. There's 2, like, there's 2 apartments, right? Basically.
Yeah. So at first the plan was to sail across Laerke, myself and 2 other friends, Brazilian girls. And the trip was actually going to be from Cabo Verde to Brazil, which is the trip that I then did afterwards. And it was going to be this, you know, Brazilian women themed Portuguese movie of like this crossing and arriving in Brazil.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, that's going to be like kind of boring because nothing really happens between
on that route,
on that trip. And I've already done this North Atlantic crossing, and I know it's pretty gnarly. So that seems really good for a movie. And also the point of this movie is to talk about plastic pollution. And that's where I saw the most, was on the Gulf Stream, like the most trash. So we have to do it then. And then the refit happens, you know. I had told Laerke, because she was ready. We were supposed to set sail in 2021 in June. By the end of June 2021, we were supposed to be sailing across the Atlantic. So the beginning of June, I was like, okay, be here by June 4th. We're gonna have 2 or 3 weeks, and we leave. So she arrives at June 4th, and she stays for another year.
Gives up her entire life for a year.
I mean, the boat, like, obviously I had no prior experience with boat building, or what a boat was supposed to actually, you know, be like when it's in its optimal condition. Ontong Java also leaked a lot and like had all these problems. So like my reference is normal. And so, yeah, the boatyard experience is its own thing in itself. It's just like all consuming, one of the greatest times of my life.
You say this, I've heard you say this before, and I don't want to give away too much of the movie. Like, as the producer, I want us to like restrain ourselves, but you've said this also, like in other interviews. You've said that, and you've told me this, that you almost would go back to that time. And like, for me, one of the reasons Remy and I want to build a new boat is like the idea of refitting is like, I can't even comprehend how much work. You took that boat apart and like basically rebuilt him.
Yeah.
Talking to him a lot, asking him what he needed.
Yes, I had this neighbor, the Magic Man. He had a couple boats down for me in the boatyard, and he's from Maine, so I knew he, you know, had some familiarity with wooden boats, and he had worked in many boatyards up there before. And so I would go to him every once in a while and be like, please, like, I need advice. Like, I am stuck. I don't know what I'm doing. And he would say, no problem. Let's go over there. Let's see what's up. And he would come to the boat and he would immediately start talking to it. He's like, hey, how are you doing today? And start petting it. And like, he's talking to it like it's a person. And like, yeah, I've talked to it, but like, that's different. Like, I don't know. We've been through some shit. Like, and he would just pet the boat and, you know, have this little conversation with it. And then he would turn to me and say, he'll tell you, and then just walk away. I'm like, fuck.
I feel like this is the most, like, probably one of the most important pieces of advice for anyone who owns a boat, is thinking of buying one or refitting one. Like, your boat is a person, and start to build a relationship with it as a person.
Listen to it. Yeah.
Well, not necessarily
Absolutely.
like anthropomorphize it, but like it's a being, it's an entity, it's a boat entity. That's the journey I've been on in this like pre-build process, is like the materials all have story, they all have an actual, they were living beings at one point, you know, like
that's so beautiful.
Especially wooden boats. Like we're choosing to build ours out of a pine from a forest that I walked every day for 5 years, you know, in Southwest France, like maritime pine. It's grown right here. And I think that when you buy a boat secondhand, or I don't know, if you buy a plastic fantastic boat, even the GRP boats, they've got elements, everything is from this planet, you know, everything is spirit and everything is a being. And then you have just like found this legend of a mentor, one of the good, not an armchair admiral, like a proper like active admiral, and he's given you this piece of juicy advice, like, you know, pat it, just talk to it, listen to it, and it's going to let you know what to do.
And it's wild how it does. And like, obviously when you don't have previous experience or your own reference to go off of, things are going to take a long time. So like the longest thing that took me to do was rebuild the bulkhead. Now knowing, and if I had all the materials here in front of me, I could rebuild the bulkhead in a week, you know. But before knowing, I mean, it took me 3 months, and 2.5 of those months was just like listening to the boat, waiting for it to tell me what the fuck to do, because I don't know. And like, how am I gonna fit this piece that's supposed to be made first into a boat, you know? And then one day it just came. It just came. Like, I'm just sitting there, and I remember, I think I was drinking like something, coffee, whatever, and I was just like, oh my God, I see it. And I sketched it down. I still have this little sketch, you know, that I did in like 2 minutes. And right away I started measuring out stuff and like started rebuilding
Wow.
the. And I mean, obviously that's not the boat telling you, but it's this focus thing, and it's this integration of
It's a
also,
connection, I think.
yeah, it's a connection. And it's like, I don't know, we have so many options nowadays to do
Yeah.
all kinds of things, and so you get put into tough situations, and it can be quite easy to like say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to do something else. But when you're 6 months into the boatyard and you realize like you have this huge issue that you're going to have to face, that's going to take up 3 more months, that you have no idea what you're doing, yeah, it could have been like, fuck this, I'm out, like, I can't do this. But the boat's my best friend. There's no way. Like,
You're
even
not
now,
abandoning.
no, and it's a different topic of discussion. But you know, when I
Yeah.
think about selling the boat or not living aboard or stuff, I'm like, oh, my heart. Like, how do you do that? You know, how do
Right?
you do that with something that's more than just an object, in that it keeps you alive in an inhospitable environment, like I was saying earlier. And like, that's just so fucking crazy. I
Yeah.
could.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, we touched on the end of life in our conversation with Haneke and Remy and Otto and Obi, and like I feel like you and I need an entire other discussion about that because it's so important. But it's so cool because you're explaining that like you are in community already actually with this boat. And then
Mm-hmm.
how is it then to bring two people who don't know you and don't know the boat onto it to cross the North Atlantic? Like, how do you transition everyone and host and make sure the boat feels comfortable with these people on board and make sure they feel comfortable with the boat, and then go through the journey that you went through, which was quite animated, without giving
Mm-hmm.
away everything that happened, because the movie's coming out soon and everyone should go see it in a cinema.
Yes. um, I I think that I definitely fell into a more masculine pattern, especially then when I was already in the water. I mean, in the boatyard too, but now we're in the water, and I have these 2 girls on board, and we're waiting for wind to cross. I mean, and this masculinity thing was so apparent that I feel like, you know, my testosterone levels rose and my body changed even over the crossing. Like, it was wild. Like, I lost a lot of just like feminine features. It's really, really crazy. And so I don't know where that comes from or why and stuff. But, you know, I think if I had been more in my feminine, I could have made things more comfortable for the girls. But I wasn't really concerned about that, because now, like, we just rebuilt a boat without knowing what we were doing. So whether I'm going out alone or not, like, shit's fucking crazy, you know? And I'm used to sailing alone, and I love sailing alone. So and now I have to take people because I made this commitment to, and I just want to get to the other side safely. Enjoy the time out there and get
Yeah.
to the other side safely. Like, that's my goal. So I really took on this like captain persona of, don't talk to me, you know, unless like it's very
But
important.
you know what?
Listen,
I would challenge that that's masculinity, having birthed 3
right?
children.
Yeah.
Like, that shit is raw female power, girl. Like, you birth from my personal experience, like I had 3 very, very different vaginal births. So like huge respect to everyone who has a cesarean birth by choice or by necessity. Like I cannot even imagine what it's like to go through that and heal from that and raise a child straight away. Like just from my personal experience going through 3 very different vaginal births, extremely different, like 8 hours, 45 minutes, and freaking like half a day or more. And like 2 of those being quite traumatic, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like no one talked to me. I just want to get out the other side alive, or at least my baby alive. And I definitely am going into this, I don't know, world of I don't give a shit what I look like or what I sound like. But this thing, you know, I'm going to do this thing.
So
and I heard this being mentioned by Tyson Younger Porter and Jack Manning Bancroft. Oh, no, like, oh, he's interviewed by someone recently. And they were talking about, he was talking about this like from Aboriginal Australian perspectives, like actually female, like this whole idea of masculine and feminine, like females are freaking scary.
Yeah, that's
you know,
that's really,
like,
really cool. Yeah.
so I kind of see it as like, actually, that's not a masculine thing. Like that's a pure female thing. And I think that too much it gets, you know, like judged as like, oh, she became the man and you know, became the captain. Yeah, I completely argue against that. But
Well, I like that too. I like that because it did feel like this sort of at the time I didn't relate it to like a mother,
yeah,
you know, archetype. I related it to a captain, man captain, because that's all I've known,
yeah,
you know, archetype. But it is that too. It's this protection. You know what you need to do. You know how we're gonna do it, and like you gotta keep everyone in check and like.
well, creative and the creation and destruction, like that's a, you know, Pachamama, right? Yeah, so I see it as a mother archetype. Like you just went in the like primal birthing mode, and you know, I don't want to get too like too spiritual here, but almost like this passage of like birthing this voyage, because and Remy's going to be home with a baby soon, so we're definitely going to need a part 2 and then a part 3, I think. But this not only did this trip like really impact the other girls, and people get to see that in the movie, but this has created this, first of all, virality on social media, where Women in the Wind Instagram has like nearly 250,000 people following it. There's a movie coming out that is going to be screening all over the world. I'm managing the community screening applications. It's overwhelming. There are so many. It's so exciting. There's a lot of people that want to see this movie. Over 3 years, and for a movie to not even be out yet, to have 250,000 following is insane. And it's birthed Women in the Wind Foundation. So let's just like talk a little bit about that now. You're the mother of Women in the Wind Foundation. My baby's going to be home soon, so we'll have to keep it short, and we can use that as a segue for part 2.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, Women in the Wind Foundation comes from so many different things, you know, and I have my talking points for the specific things when they need to come up. But in this conversation, being this holistic view of everything, of my life and the voyages and the foundation, it comes from that place of the beginning of saying, shit, I can just do nothing, sure, but I would like to do something meaningful. And I feel like this is like a wonderful way for me to be able to do that, where I can leave something behind in the world that hopefully has a really nice impact. And then it comes from trying to fundraise for the voyage and people not having full faith. And I totally get it. Like, why are you going to give me, you know, however much money if you don't even know if this is gonna work out. Like I might die, and then you're associated with giving me money. I
But
don't
it's
know.
funny now because I mean that was the third crossing and you've done 4. So like
Yeah,
now you're at 4 and people fall from the sky to try and help you, to the point where you're just like, no, no,
yeah,
no, please help the foundation. Like that's where you're directing that attention. Like you've become semi-famous
absolutely.
in the sailing world and you have a lot of attention on you for someone who went out to sea to kind of just be alone and
Yeah,
not,
and that's
it
the
was
thing.
never about that.
Exactly, and that's the thing is like, I mean, the first moments, the first voyages, the first experiences, the first adventures, first projects, they're the most impactful. They're the,
Yeah.
you know, they're the ones that really change you as a person and shape your life and shape your meaning. And so, yeah, it would have been nice to have a little bit more support, you know, during when I went to buy the boat or the first crossings and stuff. And now that I'm a little bit more settled and focused, people come in out of the woodworks like, when are you sailing again? Can I give you things? And I'm like, no, guys, like, but you could have.
Yeah,
And so I
exactly.
want, yeah, I want those first experiences and first projects, adventures, etc., for other people and other women to be the best they can be. And I want to be able to use my experience and my voice and, you know, my YouTube video and this film and the foundation and all of that as proof for other
Yeah.
people's projects. Like, hey, like this person might have never rowed across the Atlantic before, might have never even fucking paddleboarded in their life or whatever, and they're gonna do a crazy thing. Let's support that, because the more support you can give to it without trying to take away something from it, without trying to change the essence of it,
Yep.
without being a sponsorship where you're like, okay, yeah, but you have to arrive at this day and you have to make a movie and you have to post on Instagram 3 times a day while you're sailing across the Atlantic or rowing across. Like, no, it's not about that. It's about the personal experience. It's about that journey within and without, but with your community or with yourself, however it may be. And like, that is then going to translate into what you can give to the world. It's so
Exactly.
difficult. It's so difficult to know what you want before you know it exists. And that's something also, like, I try to share with people, you know, outside of this foundation, just like in my own life, is, man, if you're feeling a little bit lost and you're like, oh, what am I supposed to do with my life or with myself or whatever, you probably just don't know yet. Like, it's not a part of your reality. You haven't been introduced to it. So don't stress. Go out there and experience, because it'll come, you know.
And maybe
You
it's
might be
not a
feeling it.
thing, you know, maybe it's not like
Right.
this one thing. Maybe it's about, you know, once you go out there and you like step into serendipity and you start to build these relationships, and then you're a part of these other communities and you're just like being, like you're actually being with purpose because you're in your proper human spirit. And I feel like men get this opportunity all the time, whether it's an innovative tech idea or going out an adventure. They get an idea and they, like, you know, have not necessarily any backup to say they can make this work. Quite often they can't. And then quite often it
Yeah.
also fails, but everyone will throw the money because the money's often coming from men. And that's a big thing for the foundation, is to be supporting women so that we are really like engaging in women to have these transformative experiences and then, you know, show up in whatever way they want to show up, transformed in some way, but like just to give them the opportunity without these dictates. You don't have to tell us what it's going to look like at the other end. You don't have to bring this ROI to the table. Like, it's not
Yeah.
about that. And we've
Yeah.
talked about the idea that, you know, we wish it didn't have to be women in the wind where, you know, like that person has to say, I'm a woman doing this project, or I'm a woman sailor or a woman mountain climber. Just, I want to be a sailor. I want to be a climber. I want to be whatever. But the Women in the Wind Foundation is going to be there to pull in this support and let the person go out and do what they need to do without having to worry about that stuff. Like that feels to me really important for the foundation from our discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, the goal is that we don't have to do that anymore. But the reality is that it's still very, very disproportionate. And like you just said about, men having ideas when they don't necessarily have backing proof that they're going to succeed, and still having an easier time getting funding and support and stuff. It's a little bit to do with just like, you're a man. Like men have a track record of success that's been, documented.
There will never need to be man in the wind, put it that way. Like there is no man in the wind, and there is not going to need to be, because that, problem is not really there. I think we're going to run out of time, but I want you to tell me, I want you to tell me how you're feeling about packing up the boat next week and getting ready for being on the road, for 3 months, touring the movie and launching the foundation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously super stoked. I cannot, I'm a little bit in shock also. Like, I can't believe this is real and this is actually happening. And it's so wild, because it's all just this process where every day you try to make it happen. And I mean, with us, you've been on this for a year and a half now, every day on WhatsApp with us, and we've been going through this for years. And it's just it's so cool to finally see it becoming this physical thing that we can bring to people in person, and it's more tangible and just amazing. So I'm really excited, but I'm also, I don't like leaving my home, and that's why I live on a boat, because I can take my home everywhere I go.
And you're about to not be alone. So I know that that's just such a juxtaposition, but where can people go to watch the movie where they're going to get to meet you and ask you questions too? Because you're physically going to be at the world tour premiere events, and maybe a few more that we're not going to tell people until after March 20, but there's a few more events where you're going to show your face. But where can people be guaranteed to see you and meet you in person?
So our main 3 events are going to be Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where we were waiting for Wind to leave and getting adjusted to living as 3 aboard, and just a special place. That'll be the first one. It'll be super, super fun. It's like an all afternoon event. We're going to have 3 screenings because 2 of them are already sold out. So we're having to open the 3rd one.
So cool.
Just be hanging out in the backyard, and then we'll do a Q&A afterwards. That one's going to be really intimate, really fun. The second one is in Paris, which is I'm just feeling a little starstruck.
What is Laerke just got named the most beautiful cinema in the world or something?
Yes, it's the most beautiful. It's also the oldest cinema in Europe. It also has the best equipment of all cinemas. It's also a historical monument. I'm just
it's Paris.
Possible?
It's Paris. It's so exciting. Paris is going to be amazing.
So cool. And then we'll close it all off in Brazil. São Paulo is part of our main events, our 3rd one. And that'll be really nice because it's kind of like a homecoming feeling for me. And, a big part of my support and base is here. And so it'll be really nice. And people are really excited in Brazil. They're very excited about all kinds of things. But for this movie, they're really excited.
No, it feels like a proper, closing that circle as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go because my Bubba's home. But I want to tease people, because this is going to probably go up before the 20th of March. So we're not going to give anything away, but I want to tease people that you're definitely going to be at a few other places.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can submit your own applications if you want to
Yes.
have this film in your community, your town, your business, whatever it is. And there's a special request section there where if you want to have any of us come and, do a Q&A and be there for it, we can.
And finally, because we get asked this all the time, when is the movie going to be online?
I wonder.
Sooner than later.
Yeah, sooner than later. I know that we've been saying that for years now, but it's
we mean it.
Yeah, we mean it, and it's just been the same process as the boatyard. It's something that you're not totally aware of how long it's going to take, especially without a lot of experience. And so it's actually now coming soon, promise. And
2025 it will be. We can say that, right? It's definitely going to be this year.
And after the premiere tour is finalized, that's when it's going to be released, but it will be announced somewhere.
But I also wanted to say, like, the effort we put in post-production of this film and the A-class team that worked so hard on it. This movie, it's a privilege still to be able to go to the cinema. We're so lucky that we've had so many cinema community applications, and we're in the process of approving those now and getting those dates out there. But like, if you can see this movie in a cinema twice,
do it
3 times, do it. It is so worth it on the big screen, because you are on board Maranoka for like nearly 93 minutes going across the North Atlantic.
Yeah, that's our goal, and I think it's worked out really well. And I think everyone will be able to have that transported experience, and so that's a very special thing, I think, to be able to do with a film.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it there for part 1 of our chat, and then part 2, like, I don't know, we might be able to do that in the flesh together, side by side, really soon. Hint, hint, wink, wink, everyone.
I'm so stoked. Thank you so much, Angie.
Thank you.
This is awesome.
Thanks for waking
2
up
hours
early.
later.
And we could have gone for 4. We're going to give everyone a break from us for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.